This wasn't about justice. Not really. It was about money, about survival, about control. 4,000 years ago, long before banks existed, long before stock markets, long before anyone even conceived the idea of an economy, one ruler understood a truth most people still refuse to see. Civilizations don't crumble because people are immoral. They crumble because financial rules fail. And when those rules fail, chaos follows. Violence follows. Death follows. Welcome to the Financial Historian, where money, power, and history collide, and nothing is ever as simple as it seems. When most people hear the name Hammurabi, they imagine vengeance carved in stone, an eye for an eye. A brutal ancient world where mercy had no place and justice was raw and unforgiving. That image is convenient. It's simple, and it is almost entirely wrong. Because if you strip away the myths and actually read the words etched into that stone slab around 1754 BC, you discover something unsettling. The Code of Hammurabi was not a moral manifesto. It was a financial system written in stone. Out of nearly 300 laws, the overwhelming majority had nothing to do with murder, assault, or revenge. They dealt with loans, wages, contracts, interest, collateral, defaults, liability, and debt. In other words, the rules that silently dictate who survives and who fails when societies grow beyond small tribes. Babylon was not a philosophical experiment. It was a commercial machine. Situated at the crossroads of major trade routes, it moved grain, silver, livestock, land, labor, and credit across a growing population. Farmers borrowed against future harvests. Merchants financed long-distance trade. Builders were paid to construct homes, temples, and canals. Everything relied on trust. And trust without enforceable rules doesn't scale. Without shared regulations, every failed harvest became a personal disaster. Every unpaid loan became a blood feud. Every collapsed house became an excuse for violence. Hammurabi didn't inherit a society of peace and try to moralize it. He inherited a volatile economic system, and he set out to stabilize it. This is the nuance most people miss. The code wasn't about making people good. It was about making outcomes predictable. Predictability is what prevents collapse. Uncertainty kills economies. When no one knows who is responsible for a loss, trade freezes. Credit evaporates. People retreat into force. Hammurabi understood that the fastest way to stop chaos wasn't to lecture people about ethics. It was to define who pays when things go wrong. The moment liability is assigned, behavior changes. Incentives are created. Systems emerge. Debt was the first problem he had to confront. In ancient Mesopotamia, debt was never abstract. It was immediate, personal, and often catastrophic. If a farmer borrowed grain and the harvest failed, he didn't default on a spreadsheet. He defaulted in reality. Land could be seized. Children could be taken as debt servants. Entire families could vanish into bondage over a single bad season. Left unchecked, this spiral didn't just ruin individuals. It hollowed out tax bases, destabilized food production, and fueled social unrest. A society that destroys its own producers and keeps them in permanent debt does not survive long. So the code imposed limits, not out of compassion, but out of necessity. Interest was capped. Debt servitude was time-limited rather than lifelong. In certain circumstances, debts could be suspended after natural disasters. These weren't acts of mercy. They were acts of risk management. Dead or enslaved farmers don't grow grain. And a king without grain doesn't remain king for long. Hammurabi wasn't protecting the poor. He was protecting the system that fed the empire. Then came contracts. Hammurabi's laws didn't care about intentions. They cared about outcomes. A builder constructed a house, and it collapsed, killing the owner. The builder paid. A merchant lost goods entrusted to him. He was liable. An agent failed to deliver. Responsibility didn't disappear into excuses. This wasn't cruelty. It was clarity. When responsibility is defined, people price risk correctly. Builders build better. Merchants insure themselves. Trade becomes safer, not because people are kinder, but because consequences are predictable. This is the quiet genius of the code. It didn't attempt to eliminate failure. It assigned it. Someone always paid. Once the responsible party is known, behavior changes. The principle that risk belongs somewhere, that losses don't vanish just because circumstances are unfortunate, is one of the oldest financial laws on Earth. Long before insurance companies, long before limited liability corporations, long before modern contract law existed, Hammurabi understood moral hazard without ever naming it. If people aren't held responsible for outcomes, they take reckless risks. And reckless risks multiplied across a society, they become collapse. Wages and prices were treated the same way. The code established fixed payments for specific types of labor. Ox drivers earned this much. Surgeons earned that much. Builders, shepherds, craftsmen, all had standardized compensation. Not for fairness, but to reduce conflict. Every negotiation creates friction. Every dispute is a potential breakdown. Hammurabi's system removed uncertainty. You knew your labor's value before you worked. You knew what would happen if outcomes succeeded, and if they failed. Markets don't need kindness. They need consistency. Hammurabi wasn't trying to maximize happiness. He was keeping commerce alive. Consistency lubricates trade. It lowers transaction costs, prevents endless bargaining, stops disputes from turning violent. In a world without courts, appeals, or regulators, these rules were the infrastructure of trust. But there was one more critical detail, and this is where the romantic image of ancient justice shatters. The rules were not equal. The penalty for the same offense differed by social class. An injury to a noble had a different consequence than the same injury to a commoner. Financial liability flowed according to status. Power was written directly into law, not hypocrisy. Design. Elites were shielded because they held land, capital, and political stability. Lower classes absorbed more risk because the system required it. This wasn't about fairness. It was about preserving hierarchy. And that, too, is a financial principle as old as civilization itself. Systems don't just manage money. They decide who absorbs losses when reality fails. Hammurabi made that decision explicit. The stone didn't hide it. It announced it. By the time the code was carved and displayed publicly, Babylon had already learned a lesson modern societies still struggle to accept. You don't control debt with virtue. You don't stabilize trade with good intentions. You don't prevent collapse by hoping people behave better. You do it by writing rules that make outcomes predictable, losses assignable, and power visible. Because once money enters the picture, morality alone isn't enough. And Hammurabi knew it. The part most people never like hearing is this. Hammurabi's system worked not because it was fair, not because it was kind. It worked because it accepted something most societies prefer to deny. Every economic system is built on deciding who absorbs risk when reality breaks the plan. The Code of Hammurabi didn't pretend losses could vanish. It didn't promise prosperity for everyone. It did something far more dangerous and far more effective. It made loss predictable. Once loss is predictable, power can plan around it. That's why the code wasn't equal. Different classes faced different consequences for the same action because equality wasn't the goal. Stability was. If a noble injured another noble, punishment was physical and severe. An eye for an eye. If he injured a commoner, the penalty was silver. If he injured a slave, compensation went to the owner because the law measured not human suffering, but damaged capital. The same logic ran throughout everything. A surgeon killing a noble lost his hands. If the patient was a slave, he replaced the asset. A builder was executed if a house collapse killed its owner, but paid compensation if a slave died. Elites held land, capital, and authority. Protecting them wasn't corruption, it was risk containment. If a wealthy landholder collapsed, the shock rippled through tenants, laborers, taxes, and food supply. If a laborer collapsed, the system barely noticed. That wasn't moral reasoning. It was cold arithmetic. And it's the same arithmetic that still governs modern financial systems, no matter how politely it's dressed up. This is where ancient history starts to feel uncomfortably familiar. What Hammurabi carved into stone, we now encode into policy. Bankruptcy laws don't exist to reward failure. They exist to control it. Debt relief isn't generosity. It prevents mass defaults from destroying the system. Central banks intervene not out of love for markets, but because uncontrolled collapse is worse. 4,000 years separate Babylon from modern economies, but the logic hasn't changed. When debt threatens the system, rules bend. When instability spreads upward, intervention appears. When instability remains at the bottom, it's often ignored. That's not ideology. That's structure. Hammurabi didn't invent this pattern. He formalized it. Think about inflation. Inflation isn't just rising prices. It's a quiet redistribution of loss. Savings erode. Debt burdens shift. Pain moves. This mechanism didn't begin with modern fiat money. It's the same logic Hammurabi applied when he capped interest and suspended debts after disasters. The financial system can't be allowed to devour the productive base. Damage must spread, not concentrate. And here's the irony. Modern societies preach free markets, fairness, and opportunity. Ancient Babylon was more honest. The code didn't pretend everyone played the same game. It told you exactly where you stood. It told you who paid when things went wrong. It didn't sell the illusion that morality governs money. It admitted money governs morality. And that honesty made the system durable. Predictability breeds participation. Participation creates growth. Growth creates power. Hammurabi knew that if people believed the rules were stable, even harsh ones, they would keep producing, trading, and lending. Chaos doesn't come from inequality alone. It comes from uncertainty, from not knowing whether tomorrow's loss will ruin you or be absorbed by the system. Modern finance runs on the same principle. Today, the rules hide in legal language, regulations, and balance sheets few read. In Babylon, the rules were carved in stone for all to see. No illusions. No myth of fairness. Just structure. This is why so many feel disoriented by modern finance. They sense immorality, but look in the wrong place. The system was never designed to be moral. It was designed to survive. And survival requires sacrifice. Someone always pays. The question is who, and whether the rules make that answer visible or hide it behind complexity. Hammurabi didn't promise freedom. He promised order. And in doing so, he revealed something most societies still resist. Financial freedom doesn't come from believing the system is just. It comes from understanding it, from knowing where risk flows, from recognizing which rules bend under pressure and which do not. This is the true legacy of the Code of Hammurabi, not vengeance, not cruelty, but the recognition that once money enters a society, power must choose between chaos and control. And control always comes with rules protecting the system before individuals. The first civilization learned this the hard way. Every civilization since has relearned it, often in crisis. History doesn't repeat, it refines. Tools change. Language evolves. Structure remains. Debt binds. Rules decide outcomes. Power manages collapse before justice. Those who understand this aren't shocked when systems bend to save themselves. They expect it. Because the oldest financial rule on earth was never about right or wrong. It was about survival. And 4,000 years later, we are still playing by it. If this gave you a new perspective, hit subscribe. History has the answers.